Some time ago, an earthquake occurred in Kazakhstan. When scientists determined the epicenter, they discovered something surprising. The epicenter was not in Kazakhstan at all. It was in neighboring China, in Xinjiang province. Immediately, a real investigation began on social media. People remembered something important. Just a few months earlier, the Chinese had started drilling the deepest vertical well in the world there. They called the project Shendi Yik 1. The goal was ambitious, to drill 11,000 meters deep into the earth. It seemed unrelated at first. But then, events unfolded like a detective story. Less than 2 months passed, and Kazakhstan shook again. This time, the epicenter was very close to Almaty, only 30 kilometers away on the border with Kyrgyzstan. Almost a year later, in March 2025, an earthquake of magnitude 5 occurred. And once again, a theory about the Chinese well spread across the internet at lightning speed. Many people wondered whether drilling a deep well could really trigger an earthquake in another country. People started searching for information. What they found was truly impressive. It turns out that the drilling of the Chinese ultra-deep well began on May 30th, 2023. They drilled in the very heart of the Taklamakan Desert. This is one of the most lifeless deserts on the planet. Chinese engineers planned to reach the target depth in 457 days, but by March 4th, 2024, they had already approached the 10,000-meter mark. That was literally on the day when the earthquake occurred in Kazakhstan. A coincidence? Maybe, but it gets even more interesting. The fact is that Shendi Yik 1 is not the only deep well in that area. The Chinese oil and gas company Sinopec has already drilled at least 2 other wells there. One reaches a depth of 9,472 meters. Another reaches 8,590 meters. These wells became the deepest in Asia. It turns out the Chinese are methodically drilling into the Earth's crust, precisely in this region. And it is precisely there that neighboring countries begin to shake. Of course, when people began massively sharing this theory on social media, journalists turned to experts. But scientists could not give a definitive answer. So could the drilling of the Chinese ultra-deep well actually trigger earthquakes in Kazakhstan and neighboring countries? The fact is that humanity has long learned how to trigger earthquakes. Moreover, man-made earthquakes have been occurring around the world for decades. And in many cases, one simple thing is to blame: water. The most classic example is the story in the American city of Denver. In 1962, the military decided to dispose of contaminated water. They drilled a well to a depth of 3,671 meters. They began pumping toxic waste into it. They started the pumping in March. By April, the city began to shake. Seismologists registered swarms of earthquakes, dozens, hundreds of tremors. The sources were located at a depth of 4.5 to 5.5 kilometers, right where they were pumping water. 3 years passed before someone thought to connect these two events. When they established the connection, they immediately stopped pumping water. This was in early 1966. It seemed the problem was solved, but the earth continued to shake for another 5 years. The water spread underground along a tectonic fault. It traveled up to 5 kilometers from the well. In other words, one well triggered seismic activity over a huge area. Now let's return to China and Kazakhstan. The Chinese are drilling wells for oil and gas extraction. And where there is oil and gas, there is always a lot of water. Formation water rises along with hydrocarbons. It needs to be separated and disposed of somewhere. Usually, companies pump it back into the ground through special wells. And here is where it gets really interesting. Research shows that scientists have not found evidence that drilling itself causes earthquakes. In other words, the process of simply drilling a hole in the ground is safe. The problem is what happens next. Scientists have discovered that when you pump water deep underground, something strange happens. Imagine that the Earth's crust is a layered cake of different rocks. Between these layers, there are faults. These faults can sleep for millions of years. And then you start pumping water in there under enormous pressure. The water penetrates these faults and does two things. First, it changes the pressure in the rock. Second, it acts as a lubricant. Imagine two huge stone blocks lying on top of each other. They haven't moved for thousands of years. There is enormous friction between them. But as soon as water gets in there, the friction drops sharply. And when stone blocks the size of a small city slide, that is an earthquake. The most insidious thing about this process is time. Water does not flow underground quickly, like in a river. It slowly seeps through pores and cracks, sometimes for months. Therefore, an earthquake can occur not immediately, but weeks or even years after pumping begins. This is exactly what confuses many people. They don't understand how it's connected. The well was drilled a year ago, but the shaking is happening only now. In fact, there is a whole list of human activities that can definitely trigger earthquakes. This is scientifically proven and happens all over the world. First on the list is water injection for waste disposal. Second is oil and gas extraction using hydraulic fracturing. That's fracking. Third is coal mining. Fourth is geothermal power plants. Fifth is the construction of large reservoirs. Yes, ordinary reservoirs, for example for hydroelectric power plants, can also cause earthquakes. When you fill a huge valley with water, the weight of that water presses on the ground with colossal force. And if there is a fault under the bottom, it can become activated. Cases are known where earthquakes up to magnitude 6 occurred after reservoirs were filled. But let's return to oil and gas. In the American state of Oklahoma, a real seismic revolution occurred. Before 2008, they registered 1 to 2 noticeable earthquakes per year. This is normal. This is natural background. People didn't even pay attention. But by 2014, more than 800 earthquakes occurred in Oklahoma in 1 year. That's more than in California. California is known worldwide for its seismic activity. What happened there? Nothing special. Simply, massive shale gas extraction using hydraulic fracturing began in Oklahoma. Companies pumped millions of gallons of water under high pressure. This fractured the rock and released the gas. And then this water had to go somewhere, so they pumped it back, only deeper. Local residents initially did not believe this was connected. But later, they conducted research and found a direct connection. The more water they pumped, the more earthquakes there were. And the oil companies denied their guilt for a long time. It took years of litigation before state authorities finally admitted, yes, these are man-made earthquakes. But America is just the beginning. In northern Russia, in Kuzbass, they have been mining coal for several decades in a row. Giant machines tear into the ground. They haul out millions of tons of rock. And here's what happens. When you remove such a mass of rock from one place and dump it in another, you disrupt the balance. The pressure redistributes. Stress builds up at depth, and sooner or later, a release occurs. On June 19, 2013, an earthquake of magnitude 6 occurred in Kuzbass. It happened near the Bachatsky coal mine. At the epicenter, the intensity reached 7 on the scale. Here's a story from Great Britain that happened quite recently. In Surrey County in southern England, there is an oil well called Horse Hill. It's quiet, peaceful, green hills. And suddenly in 2018 to 2019, more than 100 earthquakes occur in a year. The magnitudes are small, up to 4. But people felt their houses shaking, dishes rattling, cracks appearing in walls. Initially, the British Geological Survey stated, "This is not related to oil extraction. These are natural processes." But scientists from University College London disagreed. They ran over 1 million computer simulations. They concluded that the earthquakes were caused precisely by oil extraction. Most interestingly, the epicenters were located 50 kilometers from the well. Experts initially said this was too far for a connection with drilling, but it turned out that pressure changes spread underground much farther than they thought. The problem is that when you pump out oil, the pressure in the formation drops. This pressure change can activate faults. The scandal was considerable. Activists sued demanding the well be closed, and they won. In 2024, production at Horse Hill was stopped. True, officially not because of earthquakes. The official reason was that the company allegedly did not assess the climate risks of the project. But everyone understood the real reason. In 2017, an earthquake of magnitude 5.4 occurred in South Korea. For this country, this was something extraordinary. The investigation showed that a geothermal plant was to blame. They were pumping water to a depth of 4 kilometers. They pumped directly above a geological fault. The water created critical stress. The fault shifted, and here was a new man-made earthquake. And the Denver case became a classic. It is now studied in universities around the world as an example of what not to do. After that story, scientists began seriously researching the problem of man-made earthquakes. And they discovered that humanity has been triggering earthquakes for a very long time. People just didn't know about it before. It turns out that even in the early 20th century, strange earthquakes were already being recorded. This was when they began building the first large dams and reservoirs. These earthquakes occurred in places where there had been none before, and now we have accurate data. We know that when they built Hoover Dam in the United States, earthquakes began there after filling the reservoir. When they built Koyna Dam in India, it was followed by an earthquake of magnitude 6.3. Many people were affected. When they filled the Zipingpu Reservoir in China, a devastating Sichuan earthquake occurred a year later. The magnitude was 7.9. More than 70,000 people suffered. Was there a connection? Scientists still argue, but many believe there was. Scientists from the United States Geological Survey created a special map. It marks regions where increased man-made seismic activity has been recorded. Do you know how many such places there are? 8 states in the United States alone. Remember we talked about the Shendi Yike 1 well? Well, they are drilling it in Xinjiang province. And this is not just some random point on the map. This is a region located at the junction of several tectonic structures. Nearby is Tian Shan. This is one of the most seismically active mountain systems in the world. And in close proximity to these dangerous zones, the Chinese are drilling an entire network of deep wells. Moreover, documents state that at least 3 ultra-deep wells are already operating in that area. And these are only the ones we know about. How many are there really? What volumes of water are being pumped there? This information is closed. Chinese companies are not required to publish data on underground pressure. They collect this information for themselves. But scientists from other countries do not have access to it. And this is exactly where we come to Kazakhstan, because everything that happens in Xinjiang directly affects Kazakhstan. Borders are just lines on a map. Faults do not recognize borders. Tectonic plates do not know about states. If China creates critical pressure on a fault that extends under the territory of Kazakhstan, an earthquake can occur anywhere along that fault. It turns out this country is in a unique situation. On one hand, the south and southeast of the republic are naturally seismic danger zones. Natural earthquakes occur there regularly. A boundary between tectonic plates runs through there. On the other hand, in recent years, earthquakes have begun to occur where there had never been any before. The Caspian region, the Tengiz and Karachaganak fields. Powerful oil and gas extraction began there, and suddenly an earthquake of magnitude 4 to 5. In central Kazakhstan, in the Zhezkazgan ore zone where they mine copper, an earthquake up to magnitude 6. In the Karaganda coal basin, also new tremors. Even at the former Semipalatinsk nuclear test site, they record strange seismic activity. It turns out that a huge territory of Kazakhstan is subject to seismic danger. Scientists say that only the very north of the country is safe. Everything else is a risk zone. But the real nightmare is Almaty. The city is located in one of the most dangerous places on the planet. Back in the 19th century, when it was the Russian city of Verny, a devastating earthquake occurred there in 1887. Magnitude 7.3. Intensity 9 to 10 on the scale. The city was practically wiped off the face of the earth. Then there was the Chilik earthquake of 1889. magnitude 8.4. This is generally one of the most powerful tremors in the history of the region. The 20th century was not calm either. The Kremenchuk earthquake of 1936, Chilik in 1967, Sarikamish in 1970, Jambal in 71. The list continues. Almaty is regularly shaken. This is a fact. The city stands right in a zone of active faults. It sits at the foot of mountains that are growing due to the collision of tectonic plates. And now add the man-made factor to this. In the north, China is actively working with its deep wells. In western Kazakhstan, they drill oil fields. In the center, they mine ore. And all this is happening in a region that is already in a zone of natural seismic activity. And so, we return to the original question. Could Chinese drilling have caused an earthquake in Kazakhstan? The answer? Possibly, even probably. But proving it is very difficult because there is not enough data. Seismic stations are needed throughout the region. Data on pressure in wells is needed. Years of observation and research are needed. Despite the fact that Russian experts and scientists from Kazakhstan say that deep wells most likely do not affect the formation of earthquakes, specialists from other countries are already actively studying man-made earthquakes. They are providing many proven examples. And even they do not know how strong a man-made earthquake can be. Before the Bachatsk case in Kuzbas, they thought the magnitude could be a maximum of 5, but it turned out to be 6.1. Scientists from the United States Geological Survey honestly admitted something important. They said, "We cannot exclude the possibility of man-made earthquakes of magnitude 7 and greater. 7 is already a catastrophe of enormous scale if it occurs near a major city." So keep an eye on the news, especially if you live in a place where natural resources are actively extracted, because the ground beneath your feet may not be as stable as you thought. That's all. If you liked this video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel.